Elon Musk is right in the middle of the conflict between Ukraine and Russia, a war that constitutes the biggest threat to peace and security in Europe since the Cold War ended in 1991. The tech mogul has lent a helping hand to Ukraine and drastically tipped the balance of the war in favor of the former Soviet state. Many experts are now saying that Elon Musk can directly destroy attacking tanks and stop Russian soldiers. But how did he manage to do it, and how much of this is true? Earlier this year, Ukrainian digital minister Mikhailo Fedorov pleaded for help after a suspected cyber attack crippled their satellite internet connections and the Russian military targeted the country's communications infrastructure. His bid for help was heard by Elon Musk. In a gesture of extreme generosity, the SpaceX founder deployed thousands of Starlink terminals to the former Soviet state. These terminals were quickly set up in hospitals, energy companies, and other critical infrastructure. It was only a matter of time before Starlink was able to get Ukraine back online. Starlink is a satellite internet constellation operated by SpaceX in order to provide high-speed internet coverage around the globe. The Starlink venture started in May 2019 when 60 satellites weighing 227 kilograms each were launched into low Earth orbit, forming the first array of Starlink constellations. 3 years later, that number has now increased to 2,400 satellites, now much heavier at 260 kilograms each. Starlink's reach has also increased to provide internet access to more than 30 countries worldwide. Starlink is the world's most advanced broadband internet system, and its satellites are the first Krypton-propelled spacecraft ever flown. Using ion thrusters powered by Krypton, Starlink satellites are able to rise to orbit, maneuver in space, and deorbit at the end of their useful life. While in orbit, these satellites are able to survey the stars in order to determine each satellite's location, altitude, and orientation via its custom-built sensors. Starlink satellites are also outfitted with 4 powerful phased array antennae. These are computer-controlled electronic scanning radars that can simultaneously search, detect, and track multiple objects from different directions and at different heights. This allows the satellite to see and avoid any space debris, allowing them to navigate through space smoothly. Interestingly, the Russian Sukhoi Su-57, a fifth-generator fighter aircraft and the very first operational stealth aircraft for the Russian armed forces, is also equipped with a phased array antenna. A similar type of antenna was also used by a heavily armed ground attack aircraft known as the Lockheed AC-130 Spectre. This ghost plane is known for its essential role in infamous wars like the Cold War, Gulf War, and the Vietnam War, where it served 4,000 combat hours protecting ground forces. The Starlink, which is equipped with this very powerful radar, is currently being utilized on the Ukrainian side of the war. What does this mean for Russia? According to the military expert Alexei Leonov, 12,000 communication satellites may one day turn into 48,000 radars. He believes that the deployment of an army of Starlink satellites in orbit is an attempt to militarize space, something that Russia has repeatedly expressed concern and disapproval of. In domestic media and Telegram channels, there are many spreading allegations that Starlink space communication terminals supplied to Ukraine are used for military purposes, in particular to control Ukrainian unmanned aerial vehicles, or UAVs. Dmitry Rogozin, the head of the Russian space agency Roscosmos, directly questioned Elon Musk about this, but the SpaceX founder denies any nefarious purposes. He assured that his only goal for sending Starlink to Ukraine was to help the civilian population get back online. There's some truth to this if we really consider what a Starlink terminal is and how it works. Starlink is a low-orbit satellite internet system. It has no purely technical ability to directly control any UAVs or drones. This is because the terminals are stationary, oriented in the same direction, and are not capable of transmitting a high-power signal at frequencies used by serial drones. Until now, since the internet as a whole has been restored in Ukraine, the Starlink ground terminals have not yet, in any way, had any noticeable impact on the war situation. This begs the question of where the allegations of Starlink being used to aid Ukrainian soldiers comes from. The British press released an article about how Starlink keeps the Ukrainian army connected to the internet in conditions of power outages. This article somehow devolved into a misunderstanding about how Ukrainian soldiers use the Starlink network to control their drones. This is obviously false. The military normally controls drones only through closed and secured channels. This is because if they try to operate their drones through an open channel like the Starlink, they risk exposing their reconnaissance. Classified information about their combat UAVs can be easily stolen by enemies through the open network. Another line from the British press says that teams operating UAVs in the field, sometimes in rural areas with poor internet coverage, can use Starlink to keep in touch with gunners and intelligence. They can direct drones to use anti-tank ammunition, sometimes silently flying over Russian forces at night while they sleep in their vehicles. This paragraph is also very easy to misinterpret, or rather, this paragraph is worded to give the wrong information entirely. Consider if the paragraph were true. It would mean that the Ukrainian army is using the internet via Starlink to monitor the actions of their own UAVs. The internet is not a secured channel. It's an open channel, and therefore it can easily be accessed by the Russians. In this case, the use of Starlink is not aiding the Ukrainian army at all. Instead, the ones being helped objectively are the Russians, as Starlink is giving them free access to Ukrainian drone activities and intelligence. After much consideration, it's not hard to arrive at the conclusion that the British press story of how Elon Musk's Starlink is helping Ukraine win the war is entirely false. It's possible that the spread of this wrong information is just a way to mislead the public, and the outrage at Musk's insidiousness remains only a consequence of uncritical perception of news from the British press. That being said, however, this does not mean that Starlink satellites are generally unsuitable for military use. In fact, some military experts are suspecting that the Pentagon may one day use Starlink to fight against Russia. Starlink's ballistic capabilities with its many satellites poses a greater threat than anyone can anticipate. This is precisely because there are so many of them and they are present everywhere on the planet. It would be very easy to turn some of these peaceful satellites into weapons and perform a combat mission, and nobody would have time to be prepared, as these satellites are already in preliminary readiness and in sufficient quantity over any area of the globe. This type of ballistic power means that the US military is definitely considering the potential use of Starlink in warfare. In fact, it's said that the military is already developing a subgroup of Starlink satellites, which will be used to intercept Russian and other combat missiles in space, following the principle of the Brilliant Pebbles project. Brilliant Pebbles was a ballistic missile defense system proposed in 1987 near the end of the Cold War. The system would consist of thousands of small missiles, not unlike conventional heat-seeking missiles, which would be placed in orbit so that hundreds would be above the Soviet Union at all times. This principle certainly sounds like the idea behind the Starlink constellation. Meanwhile, Russia has its very own anti-satellite weapons, or ASAT, with thermonuclear missiles. If a nuclear missile detonates at altitude, it can completely destroy a satellite. At a distance, it can emit electromagnetic radiation that can disable all electronic components of a satellite, rendering it useless. This prompted the question of whether the Starlink can withstand an attack from a Russian ASAT. Musk answered this question during a Business Insider interview. He told Insider, "If you attempt to take out Starlink, this is not easy because there are 2,000 satellites. That means a lot of anti-sat missiles." The SpaceX CEO was very confident in the ability of his aerospace company, claiming that they can launch satellites faster than Russia can take them down. Alexei Leonov stressed that there is no intention to destroy United States satellites because it would mean a declaration of war. But preventing those satellites from working is another matter entirely. After all, electronic warfare is not new to Russia. They have a long history of controlling the electromagnetic spectrum, and interfering with the enemy's radar and communications networks and satellites is easy for them. Starlink being used in warfare is certainly a very bold, if not outrageous, idea. Tell us your opinions about it in the comments section below.